In the north of London there is a place of quiet and shadows. It is called Highgate Cemetery. It is not like other parks or gardens. Here the stones are old and grey. They lean like tired shoulders, heavy with the weight of years. Ivy, dark and green, crawls over everything. It covers the names of people long forgotten. It climbs the tall, sad angels who watch over the graves. The air here is different. It is still and cool, even on a warm summer day. You can feel the silence press in around you, a silence that seems to listen. It is a place of deep peace, but also of deep mystery, a place where the past feels very close, breathing softly on the back of your neck. The trees in Highgate Cemetery are ancient. Their branches twist and reach like gnarled fingers against the sky. They create a thick canopy, a roof of leaves that sunlight struggles to pierce. Below, the paths wind through a maze of tombs and mausoleums. Some are grand, like small, forgotten houses for the dead. Their doors are heavy, made of iron and stone, and locked for centuries. Others are simple, just a name and 2 dates carved into a weathered slab. Shadows dance and play here, shifting with the clouds that pass overhead. They hide in the hollows of statues and behind the trunks of the old yew trees, making you look twice at things that are not really there. It is a beautiful place in a strange and haunting way, but it is also a place that holds secrets. The Victorians who built it loved grand displays of death. They filled it with Egyptian-style avenues and Gothic towers. They wanted to remember their dead forever. But as the years passed, the cemetery fell into ruin. Nature began to reclaim it. Weeds grew thick and wild, tombs cracked and fell open to the elements. It became a wild, overgrown wilderness in the heart of the city. A place where it was easy to get lost, a place where your imagination could run wild, especially as the sun began to set and the long dark night began to fall. This is the setting for our story, a story that began not so long ago, in a time when people thought such tales belonged only in books. It is a story of a fear that took hold of a community, a fear that slithered out from between these very stones. People began to speak of something unnatural, something that did not belong in the modern world. They said something ancient and evil had woken up inside the locked gates of Highgate Cemetery. They spoke of a creature that slept during the day and hunted in the darkness. They called it the Highgate Vampire, and its story begins on one cold, dark night. The story begins with a young man named David Farrant. It was the winter of 1969, and David often walked past the cemetery. One evening, as the sky turned a deep, bruised purple, he felt a sudden chill. It was a cold that had nothing to do with the winter air. It felt wrong. He stopped and looked towards the tall iron gates of the cemetery's north entrance. He felt a strange pull, a sense that he was being watched from within the darkness of the graveyard. He stood there for a long time staring into the shadows, his heart beating a little faster than usual. He could not explain the feeling, but it was a powerful sense of dread, a feeling that something was deeply out of place. A few months passed. Winter turned into the first hints of spring in 1970. David could not forget the strange feeling he had that night. He wrote a letter to the local newspaper, the Hampstead and Highgate Express. In the letter, he described the unnerving experience. He asked if anyone else had seen or felt anything unusual near the cemetery. He did not use the word vampire. He only wrote about a grey figure he'd sensed. He wondered if perhaps he was the only one, if his mind was playing tricks on him. He posted the letter and waited, not knowing that he was about to open a door to a story that would grip the entire city of London. To his surprise, other people wrote back. Their letters were printed in the newspaper in the weeks that followed. They told their own strange stories. A woman wrote about her car stalling suddenly as she drove past the cemetery late one night. She said she saw a tall, dark shape with glowing eyes gliding behind the railings. Another person described seeing a man with a horrifying face floating over the path. Suddenly, David Farrant was not alone. The quiet, unspoken fears of the local people began to surface. It seemed many had seen something they could not explain, but they had been too afraid or embarrassed to speak of it until now. This was when the story truly took flight. The idea of a ghost or a phantom was one thing, but the descriptions had a chilling similarity. They all spoke of a tall, dark figure. They spoke of a feeling of intense cold and fear, and some mentioned hypnotic burning eyes. The whispers started to grow louder. People began to put a name to the terror that haunted the old cemetery. It was a name from old legends, from forgotten countries, from stories told to frighten children. They began to call the creature a vampire, the Highgate vampire, and the fear it created was very, very real. Once the word vampire was spoken, it was like a match thrown on dry grass. The story caught fire. The local newspaper, which had started with David Farrant's simple letter, was now filled with tales of the supernatural creature. People who had lived near the cemetery for years suddenly remembered strange things. They recalled odd noises in the night, unexplained shadows, and a persistent feeling of being watched from the overgrown grounds. The story was no longer just about a grey figure, it was about a king vampire of the undead. The legend grew with every telling, each new witness adding another layer of terror to the tale. The local community was divided. Some people laughed at the stories. They said it was nonsense, a product of overactive imaginations. They blamed it on pranksters or foxes moving in the shadows. The police also dismissed the claims, stating there was no evidence of any real threat. They warned people not to believe the growing hysteria. They insisted that Highgate Cemetery was just an old burial ground, nothing more. But for many others, the fear was genuine. They started to avoid walking near the cemetery after dark. Parents told their children to come home before sunset. A quiet, nervous energy settled over the neighborhood. The story was too good for the newspapers to ignore. Soon it was not just the local paper reporting on the Highgate vampire. National news channels sent reporters and television crews to the cemetery gates. They interviewed David Farrant. They spoke to frightened residents. They filmed the spooky Gothic tombs of the cemetery. The legend of the Highgate vampire was broadcast across the country. London, a modern and bustling city, was suddenly captivated by a medieval horror story. The cemetery, once a forgotten corner of the city, was now famous. It became a place of dark fascination for the entire nation. As the fame of the legend grew, so did the number of people who wanted to see the vampire for themselves. Groups of teenagers and amateur ghost hunters started gathering at the cemetery gates at night. They would climb over the walls, armed with wooden stakes and crosses, hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature. This created a new problem. The cemetery became a place of chaos. The police had to patrol the area to keep people out, not to protect them from a vampire, but to protect the historic graves from vandals and trespassers. The situation was spinning out of control. The legend had taken on a life of its own. As the panic grew, more and more chilling stories began to emerge from the shadows of Highgate. One of the most famous accounts came from a young nurse. She was driving home late one night from her shift at a nearby hospital. As her car passed the dark, silent walls of the cemetery, her engine suddenly sputtered and died. The street was empty and quiet. A thick fog swirled around her car, making it difficult to see. As she tried to restart the engine, she looked up and froze in terror. A tall, dark figure was standing by the cemetery gates, its eyes burning into hers with a strange red glow. She said she felt completely paralyzed by fear, unable to scream or move. Another disturbing tale involved a man who often took a shortcut through the cemetery despite the warnings. One evening he was walking along a familiar path when he was violently thrown to the ground. He felt no one push him, saw no one near him. It was as if an invisible force had attacked him. He scrambled to his feet and ran, not daring to look back. When he got home, he discovered strange scratches and bruises on his shoulders, like the marks of powerful hands. He never walked through the cemetery again. His story added to the growing belief that the entity in Highgate was not just a harmless ghost, but something powerful and malevolent. The strangest and saddest stories were about the animals. In the woods surrounding the cemetery, people began to find the bodies of foxes and other small creatures. This was not unusual in itself, but what was strange was how they were found. The animals were not diseased or attacked by other predators. They were found completely drained of blood, with small marks on their necks. The police and animal experts could not explain it. For those who believed in the vampire, this was the final terrifying proof. It was a sign that the creature was hungry. It was a sign that it was feeding. These stories, shared in quiet whispers in pubs and over garden fences, built a powerful picture of a terrifying presence. It wasn't just one person's sighting anymore, it was a pattern of strange and frightening events. A floating man with a terrifying face seen by two sisters walking home. A homeless man found sleeping in a tomb, driven mad by something he claimed to have seen inside. Each new story was like a piece of a puzzle, and the final picture they created was one of an ancient evil that had made its home among the forgotten graves of Highgate. The fear was no longer just a story in a newspaper, it felt real and dangerously close. As people tried to understand the terrifying events, some began to look into the past. They wondered if this was truly a new phenomenon. Had the creature always been there, sleeping beneath the soil, only to be woken recently? Local history and old folklore began to provide some chilling clues. Rumours surfaced of a nobleman who had travelled to England from Eastern Europe in the 18th century. The story said that his coffin was brought to London and placed in the vault of a family tomb within the area that would later become Highgate Cemetery. The tale suggested he had practiced black magic in his homeland and was suspected of being a vampire. This story fit perfectly with the classic vampire legends, like the famous story of Dracula. In those tales, the vampire was often an aristocrat from a distant, mysterious land. He would travel to a new country and bring his curse with him. The idea that a real coffin, containing a real vampire, had been placed in Highgate Cemetery was, well, a terrifying thought. People began to speculate which of the grand, crumbling mausoleums might hold this dark secret. The legend claimed that the nobleman's followers had brought him there, and that he lay dormant for centuries, waiting for the right moment to rise again. This historical rumour gave the modern sightings a new and frightening depth. It suggested that the creature David Farrant and others had seen was not just a simple ghost. It was an ancient, intelligent and powerful being, a king among the undead. This idea explained the sense of evil that so many witnesses reported. It explained the hypnotic power of its eyes and its apparent ability to control the minds of its victims, freezing them with fear. The story of the nobleman from the east transformed the Highgate Phantom from a local spook into a figure of international horror. Suddenly, every old tomb and locked crypt in the cemetery seemed to hold a potential secret. People looked at the Egyptian Avenue, a grand passage flanked by tombs, and wondered if the nobleman lay within one of them. They stared at the Circle of Lebanon with its giant, ancient cedar tree and surrounding vaults and imagined the vampire sleeping beneath its roots. The old legend gave the modern fear a foundation. It provided an origin story for the evil that now seemed to walk the paths of Highgate. The past and the present had merged, creating a single terrifying narrative that was impossible for many to ignore. With the story now a national sensation, it was only a matter of time before professional paranormal investigators got involved. While David Farrant was the first to bring the phenomenon to public attention, another man soon stepped into the spotlight. His name was Sean Manchester. He was the president of the British Occult Society and presented himself as a serious vampire hunter. Manchester claimed to have a deep knowledge of such creatures. He took the stories coming out of Highgate very seriously. He declared that the entity was, without a doubt, a real vampire of the undead. Manchester began his own investigation. He spoke to the witnesses who had written to the newspaper. He collected their testimonies and searched for patterns. He claimed that one young woman who had encountered the vampire was now suffering from its curse. He said she was having terrible nightmares and that 2 small marks had appeared on her neck. According to Manchester, this was a classic sign of a vampire's attack. He believed that the creature was not just haunting the cemetery, but was actively seeking victims in the local area, slowly draining them of their life force night after night. His proposed solution was dramatic and controversial. Manchester declared that the vampire had to be destroyed. He explained that this could only be done in one way, a wooden stake driven through its heart. He also spoke of the need for an exorcism, a religious ceremony to cleanse the cemetery of its evil presence. He announced his intention to enter Highgate Cemetery, find the vampire's resting place and perform the necessary rituals to put an end to its reign of terror. This bold claim turned the already sensational story into a full-blown media spectacle. David Farrant, however, disagreed with Manchester's approach. While Farrant believed there was a supernatural entity in the cemetery, he did not think it was a blood-sucking vampire in the traditional sense. He felt that trying to hunt it with stakes and crosses was dangerous and foolish. This disagreement created a rivalry between the two men. They became the two leading figures in the Highgate saga, each with his own followers and his own theory about what was haunting the graveyard. Their public feud only added more fuel to the fire, making the legend even more famous and confusing for the public. The rivalry between Sean Manchester and David Farrant came to a dramatic peak on Friday, the 13th of March, 1970. A television news program had interviewed both men, and the broadcast whipped the public into a frenzy. Manchester announced that he would lead an official vampire hunt into the cemetery that very night. He invited anyone who was brave enough to join him. The television report, combined with the superstitious date, created an atmosphere of intense anticipation. It seemed that the final confrontation with the Highgate vampire was about to happen, and the whole country was watching. That night, a huge crowd gathered at the gates of Highgate Cemetery. Hundreds of people, teenagers, amateur ghost hunters, curious locals, and media reporters swarmed the area. It was a scene of complete chaos. The police were overwhelmed. Despite their best efforts to keep everyone out, the crowd was determined. As darkness fell, dozens of people scaled the high walls and fences, pouring into the cemetery grounds. They carried torches, makeshift wooden stakes and crucifixes. They were ready for a battle, but they had no idea what they were looking for or what they might find in the darkness. Inside the cemetery, the mob of self-proclaimed vampire hunters ran through the maze of graves. They broke open the locks on old tombs and prized open the lids of stone coffins, searching for the vampire's lair. The sacred peace of the cemetery was shattered by shouting, running footsteps, and the crunch of broken stone. It was a night of desecration and hysteria. Many historical graves were damaged in the frantic search. Of course, no vampire was found. The great hunt descended into a chaotic and fruitless rampage through the historic burial ground, causing more damage than any ghost or ghoul ever could. In the aftermath, both Sean Manchester and David Farrant were criticised. The police condemned the mass trespass and the vandalism it caused. The cemetery authorities had to repair the damage and increase security to prevent it from happening again. Manchester later claimed that he and his small group had managed to enter a specific tomb where he believed the vampire rested. He said he performed an exorcism but was unable to stake the creature. Farrant, for his part, was arrested in the cemetery a few years later with a crucifix and a wooden stake. Claiming he was still trying to deal with the entity in his own way, the great hunt had solved nothing, but it cemented the legend of the Highgate vampire in the annals of modern folklore. After the chaos of the great vampire hunt in 1970, you might think the story would fade away. For a while it did. The newspaper headlines moved on to other things. The police patrols and the damaged tombs served as a reminder of the mass hysteria that had gripped the community. The cemetery gates were locked more securely than ever before. For many, the Highgate vampire became just a strange and slightly embarrassing memory, a moment of collective madness from the past. The world moved on, and the overgrown cemetery was left once more to its silent, sleeping residents. But a legend as powerful as this one does not die so easily. It lingers like the morning mist among the gravestones. Even after the excitement died down, strange things continued to happen. People walking past the cemetery at night would still report a sudden, unnatural drop in temperature. They would still catch a glimpse of a tall, dark shape moving between the trees out of the corner of their eye. Visitors taking tours of the cemetery during the day sometimes spoke of a feeling of unease, a sense of being watched by unseen eyes, especially when they passed certain old, dark tombs. The story has been kept alive through books, documentaries, and the internet. David Farrant and Sean Manchester both wrote books about their experiences, each telling their own version of the events. Their rivalry continued for decades, ensuring the tale was never completely forgotten. New generations discovered the legend, and tourists from all over the world now visit Highgate Cemetery, not just to see the famous graves of people like Karl Marx, but to feel the spooky atmosphere for themselves. They come hoping, and perhaps fearing, that they might experience the lingering chill of the vampire's presence. So the legend continues. Highgate Cemetery remains a place of deep fascination and quiet dread. It is beautiful and peaceful, yet it holds the memory of a great fear. Most people today do not believe a real vampire sleeps in one of its vaults, but the story has become part of the place itself. It is whispered on the wind that blows through the ivy. It hides in the deep shadows cast by the Gothic angels. The cemetery is forever tied to its most famous and most terrifying resident. The feeling that something is not quite right in Highgate has never truly gone away. And so we come to the end of our tale, but not to the end of the legend itself. The story of the Highgate vampire serves as a strange and eerie warning. It shows how a single, unexplained sighting can grow into a powerful fear that captures the imagination of an entire city. It reminds us that even in our modern, scientific world, there are still dark corners where ancient fears can take root and grow. The old stones of Highgate Cemetery hold the memory of that fear, and some say they hold the creature too, waiting patiently in the darkness. The legend has left behind one final chilling piece of folklore. It is a warning that is still whispered among those who know the story well. They say that the vampire is tied to its name, a name that was lost to history but rediscovered by the occultists who hunted it. They say that the name itself holds power. To speak it is to draw the creature's attention. To think of it is to invite its cold presence into your thoughts. It is a secret that is best left undisturbed, a door that is best left unopened. The warning is very specific. You must never, ever go to the gates of Highgate Cemetery at midnight. You must not stand there in the darkness with the silent tombs behind the iron railings. And above all, you must not whisper the vampire's name into the night air. The legend says that if you do, you will feel a sudden cold. You will hear a rustle in the leaves behind you, and if you are foolish enough to turn around, you might see two red eyes glowing in the darkness, fixing on you. You will have woken the vampire. And what is that name? That is a secret the legend keeps to itself. Perhaps it is for the best. Some stories are meant to scare us. They are meant to remind us to have respect for old places and for the mysteries we do not understand. The Highgate vampire may or may not be real, but the fear it created certainly was. And that fear still hangs in the air around the old cemetery, a silent warning to all who pass by. A warning about the things that sleep in the dark and the danger of waking them up.